Hello and welcome to this video on the recurrent conspiracy theory that Big Pharma, scientists, and doctors are withholding the cure to cancer. Let's assume that there is some grain of truth to this crazy idea, that money trumps humanity, that the prestige of the discovery is mitigated by corporations or a nebulous cabal, that oncologists have so little faith in their own work that they would happily extend the suffering of their patients for personal gain.
Gentlemen, in exactly 5 days, we will be $100 billion richer.
Is there still a valid possible argument to be had as to why we might have a cure for cancer but simply not provide it? Yes? No? Maybe? Cancer is incredibly diverse. Think about any given organ or even tissue within the human body, and there is a possible corresponding form of cancer. Melanomas of the skin, leukemias, lymphomas, and myelomas of blood, hepatomas of the liver, ovarian cancers, prostate cancers, pancreatic cancers, and so the list goes on. It is not a simple condition, but it is covered by a single, simple term that obscures reality. Cancer cells are, by definition, cells that have an uncontrolled growth, loss of function, and do not respond to regulatory signals. They will nearly always be poorly identified by the immune system, and so the natural killer cells that normally remove mutated cells are unable to perform their function. This makes it hard for the body to deal with cancer, and why it often requires medical intervention. Cancer is more often than not caused by a genetic mutation in one of several possible regulatory pathways, collectively called oncogenes. These could be regulators, promoters, and suppressors. Each performs a certain range of functions. Tumor suppressor genes protect the host by monitoring how cells reproduce. This is generally a case of how quickly and how accurately they are reproductions of the original, how often they undergo this cycle, and whether or not the cycle is performing correctly. Promoter genes are meant to be limited by several layers of regulation, things like requiring certain signals or only responding to certain pathways. In cancer, these become corrupted and may either fail to be downregulated or only be made active by any signal that enters the cell. Finally, there are regulators. These are more focused on function. They generally look at what the cell is doing and is it performing the correct actions. If it's not, will the cell undergo a process of apoptosis? Failing that method of control, will the cell instead proliferate in its corrupted state? These are the intrinsic paths to prevent or cause cancer. This explains how the cell becomes cancerous, but how then would the gene or similar be distorted for this to occur? It can occur through many factors. Environment, inherited genes, and stress are just a few possible options. These can cause problems with how effectively and accurately genes are copied, and in the larger scheme, the entire DNA strand. If these are put into a cell and are corrupted, or at least not copied faithfully, the gene will not function, or function properly. This is commonly associated with consumption of toxic compounds like alcohol and tobacco that will stress the body. Inherited defects are slightly different. These are generally unavoidable and often come from getting 2 copies of an already defective gene, one from each parent who is otherwise, broadly speaking, healthy. Then there are environmental factors. Skin cancer is best exemplified by this. UV radiation causes a change in the linkages between nucleotides. Specifically, certain nucleotides will bind to others that separate the cross-helix joint and make it parallel. This is why skin cancer is closely associated with sunburn, which is the body attempting the purge of damaged cells with these mutations, but it is an imperfect system. This should give you some brief idea about why cancer is and how it occurs. Let's now look at what treatment we know exists to treat cancer. The main options that we know of are surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation therapy. The purposes and processes of a surgery are obvious. The surgeon physically removes the tumor by cutting it and some of the surrounding tissue out of the host. This reduces the chances of missing cancer cells that might cause harm to return. Chemotherapy is interesting. In broad terms, it targets the process of cell replication. It interrupts this process and prevents the cell from dividing, and therefore prevents the growth of a tumor. Slowing down, if not stopping the tumor growth, means the immune system has a chance to catch up to the tumor and begin destroying it. Radiation therapies take the process of mutation and amplify it in a very specific area. The radiation causes even more mutations in the cancer cells, which almost always lead to adverse changes. These changes cause the cells to die. Less common but increasingly relevant are immunotherapies, hormone therapy, and targeted drug therapies. Immunotherapies are a very novel and interesting field of treatment. They essentially take a marker that the immune system can recognize from a cancer cell and present it to the immune cells. These cells then take it to dendrites, which facilitate the immune system mounting a proper response that is on a larger scale to the cancer cells. It is like giving the immune system a very big clue. In a similar line of reasoning, there are hormone therapies. These are especially useful in cases of androgen-caused, promoted, or otherwise influenced cancers. This includes cancers like those found in the prostate or caused by the BRCA genes. These both respond to sex steroids like estrogen and testosterone. By blocking receptors, reducing expression, or otherwise interfering with the process that relates to the hormone, the cancer's effect and rate of growth can be dampened. Finally, there are targeted drug therapies. For many years, there were few options for treating cancer. It was a small range of chemotherapy agents, radiation, and surgery. This meant oncologists would use drugs they knew worked best, but were often very toxic. In the current year, we have more drugs available, and they are prescribed more frequently. This has led to the identification of certain drugs that work far better than others for different ages, races, and cancer diagnoses. Choosing the best drug based on these factors is called targeted drug therapy. 4 of these points have something in common. Chemotherapy, immunotherapy, hormone therapy, and even targeted drug therapy are handicapped by delivery. Most drugs are not specific in how they are delivered, but instead enter the body and diffuse across most tissues and organs, which is one reason why people can go bald during chemotherapy. This leads to the drugs or treatment taking a while to reach levels where it will adversely affect the tumor mass. In fact, this delay can lead to serious adverse effects by reaching levels that are toxic to other tissues first. This means some oncologists will use less of a single drug, but more drugs in general, which creates a more effective cocktail. The sum of the parts is greater than the individual components in these sorts of situations. It is largely this last point which has become the crux of what prevents us from treating cancer with greater success. Individually, most drugs are indiscriminate in what they affect. This leads to off-target effects, such as going bald, as the hair follicles and even the villi in the digestive tract are unable to be replaced. Some researchers are now looking on developing better methods to deliver treatment. This includes encapsulation of drugs, attaching it to antigens that target specific cancer cells, and developing treatments for specific types of cancer based on this. This specialized and targeted delivery lets us take a specialized, more effective, or even cocktail of drugs to the cancer cells and use a higher dose. This leads to better treatment with less toxic effects. In summary, we may have the cure for cancer, but we cannot use it as it is. There are many drugs and treatments available to use today. If we were able to effectively deliver them in adequate quantities, then we might be able to treat cancer better, but we are limited by modern delivery mechanisms and effects. If we were trying to achieve local doses that were more effective than what we have now with current methods, we would, for all intents and purposes, poison people. With new and better ways to target the delivery, then we could achieve better results without harming patients. This may lead to treating more cases of cancer better and with more efficiency and effectiveness, but that is simply not possible today. No, we don't have a cure for cancer, and no one is suppressing it. We might be able to use the tools we have today to treat cancer, but we lack knowledge and application. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.